All right, let's talk a little bit more about the nested model as it pertains to doing research papers. Now, the nested model posits that we've got these four levels: domain, abstraction, idiom, and algorithm. And I discuss a whole bunch of different ways to validate and the idea that we match the method to the level. But, and here's the big thing, it is extremely rare for a single research paper to try to hit all of these goalposts at once. This paper, it would be 400 pages long. It would take you 12 years to do. So typically a single research paper would include only a subset of these methods, carefully targeted to be a match with the claims of contribution in the paper. For example, let's go through and look at a few papers and analyze them in terms of this nested model and think about which areas they are actually doing validation in. So Matrix Explorer by Nathalie Henry and Jean-Denis Fouquet, what they did in that paper was they observed and interviewed target users at the domain level. And then they did some justification of their idiom design. At the idiom level, they did do computational benchmarks, measuring system time and memory, and they also presented a qualitative analysis of the results of their system. So quite a few, but of course note how that wasn't every single possible method. Another one, a paper out of my own group, Live Rack. So in that one, we also talked about observing and interviewing target users at the domain level. We also justified our design choices and then had qualitative image result analysis. And then we also talked about doing a field study where we deployed it and then documented the usage in the field. Here's another paper by Nowak from graph drawing, and in it he was proposing an energy model for graph clustering. That's the so-called Linlog energy model. And notably in this paper, what was appropriate, because it was very much a algorithm intended to fulfill particular idiom requirements, was that there was extensive qualitative and quantitative result image analysis. And that was the main validation method for this paper because it was aimed at a really targeted question. So it did not involve talking to users because it was a particular posited idiom level approach. And so they really only needed to try to explain how algorithmic choices affected what the idiom displayed. They were not trying to link that directly to an end user target user use case. Here's another one. George Robertson et al. Studied the effectiveness of animation in trend visualization. And so that was an entire paper, which is what we often call just an evaluation paper in Viz. And so that paper was really focused on being a laboratory controlled experiment with human users, where what they were trying to do is measure how long it took people to do things, measure the amount of errors. So it was, the entire paper was about a particular laboratory study. Another example, in Michael McGuffin and Robin Balakrishna's interactive visualization of genealogical graphs paper, they did not try to do anything like a field study, but they had a very careful justification of their idiom design and a discussion of a great deal of alternatives and why they were or were not suitable. They also had the qualitative analysis of results images, and they did do a preliminary test on human subjects where they got domain experts to use it, and they got some anecdotal evidence of its utility from that small set of users as evidence towards the idea that a particular kind of user, the target users, which in this case were genealogists, could they use the system and find it the data they needed from that visual representation. And then finally, a system on flow map layout by Fawn et al. From Stanford had their justification where they did discuss design alternatives and justified their choices. They did complexity analysis from a theoretical point of view and also did computational benchmarks. And then finally, back at the idiom level again, had qualitative result image analysis. So what I want you to notice from this is none of these papers really tried to have every single possible method. You have to pick a subset. And the key question as a researcher is, have you aligned your validation approaches with your contribution claims? And that's really what the nested model is trying to encourage you to do, is think carefully about what level are your claims on, and then have you picked an appropriate justification method given what your claims of contribution are.